I believe that climate change is shaping the future financial system. So I'm sure when you heard the introduction that I'm here to talk about finance and banking, you had certain thoughts, certain words. Usually when you talk about banking or you think about banking, certain words or thoughts come to mind. And often it's not all heartwarming, right? Especially I was reading the news about what's going on in the banking industry here in Ghana. And I'm sure if I therefore said to you that bankers can save the world, you would say, right? You would probably question that possibility. But I do believe that bankers can save the world, even if they didn't mean to. There's a well-known economist called Adam Smith. And Adam Smith came up with this theory around self-interest. And he said that it's not of the benevolence of bankers that we should expect our meals, but out of their own self-interest. And indeed, banking is one of the most capitalistic of sectors. Bankers don't wake up every day to save the world. We have the experience and examples of that. The global financial crisis, for example. Research has found that the global financial crisis it was catalyzed in the US. But it was not just one institution or one person that started the crisis. It was several institutions, related and unrelated. The spark started in the US and it rippled around the world. And then you wonder why was it so pervasive? It's because the culture of banking is a lot driven by self-interest. So how can this self-interest be beneficial, as Adam Smith says? Well, I was one of the millions of people who benefited from self-interest. My sisters and I were able to get into our first home because of self-interest. At the time we were living in the US, but of course a few months later, the bubble burst. Lives were devastated. The financial system was never the same again. So you would argue that as much as self-interest had a positive outcome, it also had a negative outcome. So there we learn another important lesson that Adam Smith gave us, and he said that banking is actually good, but it's only good as long as it is supporting productivity. It is only good as long as it's helping to create value for our economies and our societies. That is when banking is good. And if you think about Africa and the future of our continent, I would argue that the most productive place that bankers can be and spend time and intermediate is this issue of climate change. Climate change is the biggest challenge that we are facing as a continent. It compounds all the challenges that we face, be it poverty, disease, youth unemployment. Climate change compounds all these issues. It also has secondary effects around our literacy rates, our education. And when you think about the lack of resources that we face under extreme weather events, you can see that it also causes social unrest. It causes political unrest. And when resources are scarce, we obviously have corruption. So climate change is a beast that is eating at our continent. So it's no wonder policymakers within the states, the various states, and also the development community are coming together to find policy-led ways to address this issue of climate change. In Africa, many of our economies are reliant on agriculture, which is why climate change is so pervasive. If you look at Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, our economies lose at least 1 to 2% of our gross domestic product every year because of extreme weather events. That equates to billions of dollars worth of economic losses. So then you have to ask, if we are losing this much and governments are trying their best to help us mitigate, adapt to climate change, why are we still at risk? Well, the reason is because it will cost billions of dollars worth of investment to change our economic systems to be green economies. So that's where sustainable finance comes in. That's where the financial sector now can really come in and save the day. because governments cannot finance the change of the economic systems. And sustainable finance, when I say that, it doesn't mean, I'm not talking about bankers wearing branded t-shirts, planting trees. I'm not talking about bankers sponsoring a walk to go sink a borehole in some rural community. I'm talking about the allocation of capital towards the three areas of sustainability. Is the finance creating economic value? And economic value is not just profits that banks make. That's financial return. Economic value is how do you contribute to the long-term growth of an economy? Is finance helping social value? Granted, you're giving loans to individuals and corporations. When you lend to individuals, they might prosper for 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years. But what happens in 10 years' time? Have you helped create long-term economic opportunities for these individuals? And what about the pie? Are you growing the pie? Or are you still lending to the same people? Are you creating long-term social value? Are you helping women and youth? And the final dimension of sustainable finance is environmental. Are you creating positive environmental impact? So those are the three areas that sustainable finance plays. And it's the areas that I'm very passionate about. But it's not that easy to say that finance can all of a sudden become sustainable finance, because it will take a redesigning of an institution. Banks have to redesign their business models. They have to redesign how they operate. We've heard about blockchain earlier. Banks also have to leverage on technology so as to reach scale and generate efficiencies. But the most important thing, and this is the crux of the matter, bankers have to change their mindset. They have to think differently. They have to feel differently. And that is not easy. Culture change is not easy. I mean, we all know that bankers are motivated by making money. So how do you make a banker decide that I'm going to finance the next hydro plant? It might be easier to finance another area, but I'm going to do this because I know it's going to help. I'm going to finance climate smart cocoa farming. I know I might not really understand it. It might take me longer to close the deal, but I'm going to do this because it's going to help the economy. It's going to help the society. That is a mindset shift, seeing that you can still make money, but make money by doing the right thing. So how do you do that? How do you help bankers see this? And I call this the show me the money principle of sustainable finance. We have to be able to let bankers see that you can actually make money by doing the right thing. And they will do it. There is green in green, and they have to see it. So how do you do that? How do you leverage on the opportunities within climate change, the opportunities within the green economy? Well, I mentioned before it'll take billions of dollars to re-engineer economic systems to be sustainable. And a number of institutions are seeing this opportunity. And one of them is the development finance world. They can see that by leveraging on the economic opportunities, they are able to make money and make an impact. And one of the instruments that development finance institutions are using to climate-proof the economy is green bonds. Green bonds are an instrument that, very much like bonds, if you know how bonds work, bonds are a debt that issuer will raise to get capital to invest. So a green bond is very much like a regular bond. But the money that the institution raises goes towards the environmental area. Remember we talked about the environmental value side. And the global green bond market right now, by the end of this year, is expected to hit $250 billion worth of assets. That is $250 billion worth of money that's looking for green opportunities. And therefore, Africa has a fantastic opportunity to leverage on this. Now, why would an institution want to raise a green bond? Well, they can tap all this money that's available. Why would an investor want to buy a green bond? I'm sure we've all heard about the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is basically an agreement between states that they will either allocate or invest or deploy capital to help mitigate climate change. So the developed world made commitments to the developing world, because we all know the developed world is the reason why we are having climate change in the first place, because they've been at it longer. So they created the problem, but what they're trying to do now is allocate capital so the developing world is not as badly affected by climate change. And therefore, there's billions of dollars worth of commitments that need to be deployed, that need to be mobilized. And this is where the issuers of green bonds, for example, can tap and leverage. So in a way, green bonds and sustainable finance is like an invisible hand that it's helping Africa to be sustainable and helping make sure that our communities can survive for the long term. Now, I'm here in Ghana, and I love Ghana. The first time I came was last year. I had the opportunity to come and train and talk to about 20 bankers. And I thought it was fantastic because, first of all, I've always wanted to come to Ghana. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm passionate about Africa. And this is, I think this is the birthplace, right? So you all started our freedom. So I love to come here. And I've really read a lot of Kwame Nkrumah's work, and I really respected what he was trying to do. And I think, by a large extent, we are living his vision, isn't it? We are going to where he had envisioned long time ago. So when I was here talking with the bankers, I thought it was fantastic that out of the about 20 of them, 10 of them were just as passionate as I was about sustainable finance. And these are corporate bankers who do big deals. And I thought, this is fantastic because here is a group of people who are making money. They are getting great bonuses. But guess what? They also want to do it the right way. And then it made me think, how many bankers do we need to change the global financial system to be sustainable, to make a sustainable impact? Well, in Kenya, we started with one. So I was the one. In 2012, I realized that banking can be better. Banking can do more. So I spoke with the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association, and he also agreed that banking should not only be about self-interest. So we were two. And then we were three, because we spoke with the chairman of Kenya Bankers Association, and he also said, but he added, he said, you know what, if we as bankers are to be relevant into the future, if banking is to be viable and not be displaced by fintech or blockchain, if we are to be relevant into the future, it can't just be about making money. So we were three. And 6 years later, we have reached out to 28,000 bankers with this idea that banking can be better. Now, not all 28,000 are going to go out and save the world, right? But maybe one or two, for sure. And when I started this work, I didn't expect that I would inspire people in Ghana, in Tanzania, in UAE, in Mongolia, in Singapore and Peru. And I've been invited to all these places to talk about sustainable finance, which is why I'm always happy when I'm invited to speak about this, because in this room, there's a future banker, or there is a banker here. And you will make the right decisions because you realize, you know what, there is green in green. You can make money and do it the right way. So when we talk about designing the future, what is the future of finance? To me, the future of finance is sustainable finance. I remember when I first started thinking about this work, I was working at Barclays, and one of my bosses at the time was like, Nuru, you are wasting my time. This is not a conversation I want to have. And I didn't let his words discourage me because I believed that no, banking is more than self-interest. And I'm glad he did not stop me from there, because can you imagine I would not have reached 28,000 people with this story. And I honestly believe the future of finance is not for people like that. It's not for those old school bankers who are just chasing bonuses. The future of finance is for those bankers who believe they can help save the world.